What you are about to hear is not a work of fiction, but a chilling account of real events reported by eyewitnesses, investigators, and historical records. If you believe that the unexplained doesn't exist, then this story might just change your mind. They say that in a modest home tucked away in Ellerslie, Georgia, there once lived a family whose quiet days were soon overshadowed by events they could not explain. This happened in the late 1980s into the 1990s, and while it never reached the kind of media wildfire that engulfs more famous poltergeist or haunting stories, those who experienced it would tell you it shaped their lives. The Wyrick family, at the center of it all, had no reason to suspect anything unusual when they first moved in. It was a regular house in a peaceful spot, surrounded by a friendly neighborhood, trees swaying in the breeze, and the soft hum of crickets at night. Yet, as time went by, small occurrences began to poke holes in that sense of normalcy, a door that would not stay closed, an odd coldness in certain rooms, or a strange fleeting shadow in the corner of one's eye. If it had stopped there, maybe they would have brushed it off, chalking it up to the quirks of an older home. But it did not stop, and the family, especially their young daughter Heidi, soon found themselves telling stories most would struggle to believe. Heidi was just a child back then, bright-eyed and curious about the world. She liked playing in the yard, drawing pictures of flowers and animals, and exploring nooks and crannies that children often find fascinating. Her parents, hoping to build a stable life in a cozy corner of Georgia, were initially delighted with how friendly the area seemed. Neighbors would smile and wave, people left small welcome gifts. The environment felt just right for raising a child. Yet the calm on the surface did not match the undercurrent that soon revealed itself. Heidi began talking about seeing an old man in the house, a kindly figure she called Mr. Gordy. At first, her mother Lisa thought Heidi might have just invented an imaginary friend. It did not seem strange for a child to create such a companion. But the descriptions Heidi gave were too detailed, too specific in the way he dressed, the lines on his face, his gentle manner. She said he would visit during the day, talk to her, tell her little stories, and stand near the window as though watching over her. Lisa and her husband Andy were a bit concerned but tried not to panic. People often say children have lively imaginations, and it did no immediate harm to let Heidi chat with this invisible friend. Then one day, a neighbor came by and the conversation drifted to local history. Lisa mentioned Heidi's imaginary friend, Mr. Gordy. The neighbor's face went pale. There had indeed been a Mr. Gordy in the vicinity years ago, an elderly man who had died sometime before the Wyricks even moved to Ellerslie. The neighbor had known him, remembered him wearing suspenders, a button-down shirt, and a certain kind of hat. Hearing Lisa mention the exact details that Heidi had described made the neighbor feel uneasy. They found an old photograph, brought it to the house, and when Heidi saw it, she pointed immediately. That was Mr. Gordy, she insisted. Her parents felt a chill because Heidi had not seen that photo before. How could she recognize him so easily? It went from being a cute child's story to something that suggested Heidi might truly be seeing someone who was no longer alive. The old man, by Heidi's account, did not seem malicious. He felt like a grandfatherly presence, making her laugh, encouraging her to share her toys. But she also spoke of another figure, this one far less comforting. He was disfigured in some way, perhaps missing a hand, or had features that scared her. She described him as a male figure who appeared without warning, looming around corners, gazing at her with an unsettling intensity. At times, she would hurry to her mother, tears in her eyes, saying she had seen him again. This second presence had none of Mr. Gordy's warmth. If Mr. Gordy was like sunlight, this other spirit was a dark cloud. With her daughter frightened, Lisa began to wonder if they had made a mistake moving here, or if something about Heidi was drawing these apparitions. Heidi spoke about the second spirit in hushed tones, saying that sometimes Mr. Gordy would tell him to go away, that Mr. Gordy would protect her. Lisa tried not to panic, but it was difficult to remain calm when her daughter was describing a spectral drama unfolding in their home. At first, the activity remained at a level they could almost ignore if they tried. Occasional sounds in the hallway, maybe footsteps when no one was there. Sometimes objects would seem to shift places. A toy in Heidi's room would end up on the living room couch. A drawer in the kitchen would open on its own. Lisa might have chalked it up to forgetfulness, but these events grew more frequent, and each one gave her an uneasy feeling, like someone was watching. Andy, initially skeptical, tried to find logical reasons for everything. Houses settle, they creak, children move things and forget. But as the weeks passed, more neighbors heard the rumors, and some privately admitted they had felt strange things in the area. Others said they knew of tragedies that had occurred in the past, though no one could pinpoint a single cause for the phenomena. It was as if pieces of a puzzle were scattered through Ellerslie's history, none of them forming a clear picture, but all hinting there might be more going on than meets the eye. Some nights, Heidi would wake up crying, saying she had a dream of the disfigured man chasing her through dark woods, or that she saw him in her closet. Lisa and Andy would rush in, calm her down, assure her that it was just a nightmare. But when Lisa tucked her back into bed, she sometimes felt a chill linger in the room, like a cool draft with no open windows. Even the dog barked at shadows occasionally, refusing to enter Heidi's bedroom on certain nights. Doors would slam on windless afternoons, and the more it happened, the more anxiety settled over the household. It was no longer easy to dismiss Heidi's stories. Something, or someone, was indeed active in the Wyricks home, and it felt tied to Heidi in particular. Word about Mr. Gordy got around, and people were curious. A few individuals with an interest in the paranormal came over, politely asking the Wyricks if they could see for themselves. Lisa and Andy felt cautious, not wanting to exploit their daughter's experiences, but they were also desperate for answers. So they let a couple of amateur ghost hunters set up a simple audio recorder and maybe a camera. One night, these folks claimed they recorded faint knocking sounds following Heidi's footsteps. They captured a few orbs of light that floated near her in the living room. Orbs, some investigators would later say, can be dust or insects catching a flash, but these moved in patterns that seemed purposeful. After reviewing the footage, the investigators told Lisa that in their opinion, something was indeed there, and they believed Heidi might be a beacon for spirits. At times, Heidi would speak about Mr. Gordy as though he were her best friend. She seemed at ease in his presence, and she would say things like, "He wants me to be happy," or "He's keeping me safe from the other man." It was sweet in a way, but also unsettling, because it implied some invisible conflict going on that none of the adults could see or control. Heidi was no longer the carefree child she had been before all this started. She was still bright, still went to school, still played with dolls, but there was a seriousness that had crept into her manner. When asked directly, she would calmly describe seeing Mr. Gordy wave to her from the yard, or stand in the corner while she colored. She had no doubt he was real. Lisa tried to accept that maybe her daughter had some form of clairvoyance or sensitivity, but acceptance did not ease the fear when that other, darker spirit showed up. One day, Heidi came running to Lisa, tears in her eyes, saying the man with the disfigurement tried to speak to her, but his voice sounded garbled and angry. She did not understand what he said, only that it felt like a warning. That was the point at which Lisa decided to seek additional help. She contacted a local minister, explaining the strange events, and the minister prayed over the house. He walked through each room, sprinkling a little holy water, reciting verses meant to cleanse the space. For a few days, the atmosphere did seem lighter. Heidi slept peacefully, and no one heard strange knocks. But eventually, the tension returned, as if whatever had been pushed away crept back in. Doors resumed slamming, cold spots popped up in the hallway, and Heidi once again mentioned seeing the disfigured man lurking at the edge of her vision. She cried that night, saying she was tired of seeing someone so scary. Lisa tried to comfort her, but the entire family's nerves were on edge. Certain investigators, or people who at least claimed they knew about hauntings, explained that places can hold energy from events in the past. They suggested that maybe the land on which the house was built had a tragic history. Others thought that because Mr. Gordy was confirmed to have existed, and Heidi seemed to identify him in an old photo, it meant that at least one spirit was definitely real. The question was why it was so attached to Heidi. Some mediums came by, invited by the Wyricks, hoping they could offer clarity. One medium reported sensing multiple presences in the home, an old man with a gentle demeanor and a second figure swirling with anger or sorrow. Another medium tried to communicate with them, but got only fragments, feelings of heartbreak, regret, confusion. Nothing definitive that would explain how or why it was there, or why Heidi was the primary target. The mediums suggested repeated blessings or smudging with sage, symbolic ways to clear negative energy. Lisa tried it all, though the effect never lasted long. Andy, who still held a sliver of skepticism, finally began to accept that Heidi really was seeing something beyond normal explanation when he heard the footsteps for himself. He was up late one night, reading in the living room, and he swore he heard small, soft steps pass behind him, almost like a child's steps. He turned and saw Heidi's bedroom door was closed, and the hallway was dark, yet the footsteps continued, moving slowly toward the kitchen. Andy stood up, heart pounding, called out, "Heidi, is that you?" No reply. He flicked on the kitchen light to find it empty. That was the moment he felt a surge of cold fear, realizing he might be living in a place touched by the supernatural. He had a hard time sleeping after that, and each night, he found himself listening, half expecting more footsteps to circle the home. The second spirit, that disfigured presence, grew bolder. Heidi told her parents that she would see him glaring at her from the bedroom door at night, not saying anything, just watching. Sometimes, she heard scratching sounds behind the walls. Lisa would check, but found no sign of rodents or anything else. If the family tried to talk about it openly, Heidi would grow anxious, so they started speaking in hushed voices, not wanting to add to her stress. Yet the more they tried to ignore it, the more it seemed to intrude. Lights flickered without reason, televisions turned on by themselves, and small items disappeared, only to be found later in odd places. The story spread through Ellerslie quietly. Some locals were supportive, sharing their own eerie experiences. Others whispered behind the Wyricks' backs, suggesting Heidi might be making it up for attention. Lisa wanted no attention at all, she just wanted to protect her daughter. She worried about Heidi's mental and emotional health. The family considered moving, but finances and practicalities stood in the way. It was not so simple to pack up everything and find a new place, especially if the haunting might follow Heidi wherever she went. Heidi still saw Mr. Gordy, often in daylight, and she said he was sad about how afraid she was. When pressed, she described him as a protector, a friend. He would sometimes just stand near her as she played, not speaking, but making her feel safe. Lisa found a certain solace in that, thinking that if there was indeed a presence, at least one spirit might be benevolent. Yet it was all so strange, having her daughter talk so casually about a ghost. In hushed conversations, Lisa told close friends she believed Heidi truly did see these things. She saw no sign of lying, and Heidi was not a child prone to making up elaborate stories. Andy, too, realized that with each new event, it was harder to deny that something was happening beyond mere imagination. Occasionally, the family had relatives visit from out of town, and they noticed the weird energy in the house. A cousin mentioned feeling watched the entire time she was in the guest room. An uncle reported hearing faint voices at night, though he could not make out the words. Lisa felt vindicated that at least she was not alone in sensing these things. But that did not solve the problem. Some nights, Heidi would wake up screaming, claiming she saw the disfigured man near her bed, reaching out to her. She described how Mr. Gordy tried to intervene, and the man would vanish, leaving the room cold as ice. In the mornings, Heidi seemed exhausted, as if her dreams never allowed her to rest. As the months wore on, the family's nerves wore thin. Lisa and Andy argued more than they used to, partly from stress, partly from lack of sleep. Their finances did not allow them a simple escape, and they did not know what else to do except continue living there, hoping the situation would improve. Investigators, sensing a noteworthy case, tried to do more thorough documentation. They brought in tape recorders, set them in various rooms overnight, hoping to capture EVP, electronic voice phenomena. Some nights, the tapes picked up faint knocks, odd clicks, or static that seemed to pulse in response to questions. They caught no clear voices saying, "I am so-and-so," but there were fleeting moments that raised eyebrows. On camera, they recorded small orbs that danced near Heidi or flitted around the living room. Critics say orbs can be dust or camera artifacts, but the investigators insisted these were different, that their movements were too intentional. Despite the stress, the phenomena rarely seemed violent. Doors slammed, yes, and footsteps clacked in empty rooms, but no one suffered serious harm. Heidi sometimes woke with scratches on her arms, lines that might have been from her own nails as she tossed and turned, but she insisted they came from the man who lurked in the shadows. Family and friends worried about her well-being. Lisa took Heidi to a counselor, just in case, but the counselor found no evidence of mental illness, only a frightened child coping with something she believed was real. Over time, Heidi grew used to talking about Mr. Gordy like he was a neighbor who dropped by for tea. If the counselor asked about him, she would describe his clothes, his gentle voice, how he told her stories of a time long past. Then, inevitably, she would mention how the other presence frightened her. The counselor could not offer a simple explanation, but told Lisa that Heidi showed no sign of lying or delusion. As word spread, some corners of the paranormal community started referring to this situation as the Wyrick House case, though it never gained mainstream notoriety. Yes, it appeared on a few ghost-related shows, and it was mentioned in certain books that track lesser-known hauntings, but it never blew up in the media the way some poltergeist stories do. Perhaps that was because the Wyricks themselves were not courting fame, not trying to commercialize their experiences. They just wanted answers and peace. Over time, small groups of investigators came, each writing their own notes, documenting sightings and strange recordings. The family often felt more like a spectacle than anything else, and after a while, they restricted who could come inside. No matter how many people visited, there was no magic fix for what they were going through. A few investigators suggested that maybe Heidi was a psychic child, the type who can see beyond the veil, intentionally or not. If so, that might explain why Mr. Gordy appeared to her in such a friendly manner, as though drawn to her openness. It might also explain why a darker spirit would be drawn in as well, feeding on the fear that manifested. Some said it was a classic poltergeist scenario, with Heidi's emotions fueling the activity. Others insisted it was specifically a haunting by distinct entities, each with its own personality. The family, lacking the resources for in-depth historical research, could not unearth a single definitive cause in the property's records. There was talk of graves somewhere on the land, or old family burial plots left unmarked, but no one confirmed it with certainty. Rumors circulated about accidents that happened in Ellerslie decades ago, but they were just that, rumors. Lisa sometimes sat at the kitchen table, head in her hands, trying to figure out how to keep going. The stress weighed on her. She prayed often, lighting small candles, hoping that faith could bring calm. On a few occasions, mediums led group prayers throughout the house, chanting softly, asking for restless spirits to find peace. For a short while afterward, Heidi slept more soundly, and the atmosphere felt lighter, as if a storm had lifted. But inevitably, the uneasy energy would creep back. They never could pin down exactly why it escalated at certain times. Some investigators thought it might get stronger when tension in the home rose, like a reflection of emotional unrest. Others believed certain anniversaries or dates might trigger it. One night, Heidi had such a vivid nightmare that she awoke screaming, certain the disfigured man had cornered her in a dark hallway. She said he seemed angrier than ever, reaching out his mutilated arm as though pleading for something or warning her away. Mr. Gordy appeared, she recounted, stepping between her and the man, telling her to wake up. When Lisa ran in, she found Heidi shaking, tears streaming down her cheeks. Heidi described the dream as though it were a real event. Lisa held her close, whispering reassuring words, but inside her own mind, she wrestled with terror. She wondered if they should check into a motel for a while, but how long could they afford that? And if these entities were attached to Heidi, was there any guarantee they would not follow her? The Wyricks relatives saw the toll it took, offering to have Heidi stay with them sometimes. Indeed, at one point, Heidi spent part of a summer away, staying with grandparents. During that time, she occasionally mentioned glimpsing Mr. Gordy near the window, or feeling the presence of the other spirit once or twice, but not to the same degree. Lisa, meanwhile, remained at the house and still sensed odd phenomena, footsteps, the occasional slam of a door, that same chill in the hallway. When Heidi returned, it all seemed to ramp up again. The correlation, combined with medium's suggestions, led many to believe it was Heidi's sensitivity that invited these visits. Stories trickled through the community, and neighbors debated whether to believe them. Some gave the Wyricks a wide berth, afraid of being drawn into something they did not understand. Others felt compassion and tried to help, bringing over homemade meals or simply offering an ear to listen. One neighbor who had lived there for decades mentioned hearing about a local man who had injured himself badly in a farming accident years back and later died, though the details were murky. Heidi's parents wondered if that man might be the disfigured spirit she saw. But none of this was definitive. There were no tidy solutions. Poltergeist hauntings rarely end with a neat resolution. Instead, they linger, flicker, and sometimes fade when the emotional or psychic triggers lessen. As time moved on, Heidi grew older. She reached an age where she could articulate her experiences more clearly. She said that Mr. Gordy seemed like someone who just wanted to check on her, that he made her feel calm. Sometimes he would appear in the corner of her room when she felt scared, or she would see him sitting on the porch as she glanced up a window. The other figure, though, remained as unsettling as ever. She spoke of it less frequently, trying to ignore it, but on certain nights she would sense him standing outside her doorway, or see him in a mirror as a flash of a twisted face behind hers. She would blink, and he would be gone, leaving her heart pounding. Yet, even with these experiences, she tried to go about a normal life, attending school, making friends, playing in the yard. The haunting had become a fact of existence for the Wyricks. They adapted, if one can call it that, living in a state of intermittent fear but pressing on. Some people who study such phenomena say there is a threshold after which a family either leaves or learns to coexist. The Wyricks, unable to leave, ended up trying to coexist. That is not to say they wanted it, but they had little choice. Each attempt at cleansing offered only short-term relief. Investigators grew fascinated, calling the house a window or portal because it seemed like multiple entities popped in and out over the months. Some mediums said they sensed not just two, but several presences, though most of them were neutral or just passing through, while the disfigured man was the only consistently negative energy. Many believed Heidi was the key. Her presence, or her innate sensitivity, acted like a light in the dark. Friendly spirits were drawn to help her, while others came with darker intent. In the early 1990s, a small TV crew from a niche paranormal show heard about the Wyrick House and approached Lisa about filming a segment. Reluctantly, she agreed, hoping that maybe more exposure would lead to someone who knew how to help. They shot footage over a couple of days, capturing Heidi's calm explanation of Mr. Gordy, the knocking sounds that echoed in the hallway, and a few orbs on camera. It aired on a minor channel, sparking a brief flurry of attention from ghost hunting enthusiasts, who sent letters and advice. But mainstream media never latched onto the story. It remained overshadowed by bigger, more sensational hauntings. In a way, that suited the Wyricks, who did not want crowds flocking to their home. They needed solutions, not spectacle. Over time, the phenomenon ebbed and flowed, sometimes quieting for weeks on end. During these peaceful stretches, the family dared to hope it was fading away. Heidi would sleep without nightmares, and the house felt almost normal. But sure enough, it would start again. An object moved, a door rattled, footsteps at odd hours, the glimpse of that same disfigured face in a reflection. The heartbreak was in the unpredictability, never knowing if the next night would be serene or haunted by the same old terrors. Sometimes the disfigured man would appear more agitated, other times more subdued, but he never fully disappeared. Lisa confided in a friend that her faith had been tested by all this. She wanted to believe that prayer and positivity could banish any dark presence, but the persistence of the haunting made her question why it remained. She tried multiple churches, multiple pastors, multiple blessings. Each new attempt brought a short lull, then the cycle resumed. By then, Heidi was entering her teenage years, and while she still sensed Mr. Gordy and the other figure, her approach to them had matured. She would sternly tell the negative presence to leave her alone, sometimes in a firm voice, as though scolding a bully. A counselor had suggested this, encouraging her to set boundaries with whatever it was she saw. Oddly enough, it helped a bit. She sometimes reported feeling the presence back away when she stood her ground. but it never stopped lurking entirely. The lesser-known nature of the Wyrick haunting became almost part of its identity. It was not a flashy story with dramatic possessions or violent poltergeist attacks that shattered furniture and flung people across rooms. It was quieter, more insidious, a mix of a kind spirit and a dark one, each tied to a child who could perceive them both. The world at large never latched onto it as an overnight sensation, but those in paranormal circles discussed it frequently, pointing to the verified identity of Mr. Gordy as a unique piece of evidence. Many hauntings rely on anecdotal experiences alone, but here was a child who recognized a deceased neighbor in a photo she had never seen, describing him to a T. It lent credibility, even if it did not fully explain the darker entity that shared the stage. By the mid-1990s, Heidi was old enough to talk openly about her experiences in interviews, albeit quietly. She described how Mr. Gordy gave her comfort, how she sometimes felt him near her when she was sad, and how the other spirits still showed up in nightmares but less often in waking hours. Perhaps the passage of time eased the intensity of whatever link existed. Some investigators theorized that as Heidi grew older and her emotions stabilized, the poltergeist-like energy diminished. Others believed that the darker spirit eventually lost interest or found no further foothold. Meanwhile, Mr. Gordy might still appear occasionally, a gentle reminder that not all ghosts or spirits have malicious intent. The Wyricks hoped that, with enough love and normalcy, the house could become just a home again, not a magnet for the unexplained. They tried to downplay it in daily life. Lisa and Andy resumed a routine: work, chores, family gatherings, keeping Heidi's schooling a priority. Every now and then, something odd would happen, a shelf tipping for no apparent reason, footsteps in an empty room, or Heidi mentioning she caught a glimpse of that man again. But it no longer dominated every waking hour. Heidi learned to cope. The sadness, though, never quite left Lisa's eyes, because she felt her child had been robbed of a carefree childhood. She also felt guilty for not being able to fix the situation. But no matter what she did, the haunting's cause and endpoint remained elusive. Word of the Wyrick House continued to slip through the cracks of paranormal lore, a sort of ghost story you might hear in smaller circles. People who do thorough research into hauntings might stumble across references to a young girl in Ellerslie who befriended a ghostly neighbor and was stalked by a darker presence. They might read about how a few recordings captured knocks and orbs, or how multiple mediums visited and sensed conflicting energies. They might find it odd that the case never hit big news or big publishers. But that is how some tales unfold, quietly, intimately, without the glare of sensational publicity, leaving them forever in the lesser-known category, whispered about among those who seek out such stories. Eventually, Heidi grew up and moved out, starting her own adult life. She claimed that while she still had moments of seeing or sensing things others did not, it was nowhere near as intense as it had been in childhood. She told interviewers that she believed Mr. Gordy was truly watching over her, a protector of sorts, while the other spirit was perhaps a tortured soul or an echo of some tragic past. In any case, it lost its grip on her once she no longer feared it. Over time, Lisa and Andy sold the house, and new owners came in. Some say they experienced nothing at all. Others quietly mentioned a sense of strange presence from time to time, but it never escalated the way it had for the Wyricks. If it was indeed connected to Heidi, it made sense that moving on allowed the house some semblance of rest, or left behind only traces that rarely stirred. The story remained a topic of fascination for ghost hunters and believers who wanted a more understated account than the big, flashy poltergeist cases. They would note that the Wyrick House had significant credibility because of the Mr. Gordy photo recognition, and because multiple witnesses heard and saw things that defied easy explanation. Many found it touching that the main haunting included a benign figure who looked after a child, a contrast to the typical narrative of purely malevolent forces. It showed a spectrum of spiritual possibilities, from comforting to frightening, coexisting under one roof. Lisa sometimes gave quiet interviews about those years, describing how, despite the fear, she grew to accept that the world might hold more mysteries than we imagine. She never glamorized it. She never claimed it was something that made her special. She described it more as a burden they learned to carry, a shadow that passed through their lives. She also said she felt gratitude that her daughter was able to cope and eventually break free of constant fear. Andy, for his part, remained more private, rarely speaking about the haunting unless asked directly. He believed that whatever happened, it was beyond conventional explanation, and that was enough for him. Some of Heidi's childhood friends recalled hearing bits and pieces from her, occasionally staying over for a night and going home jittery and wide-eyed. As the 90s wound down, the Wyricks haunting receded into history. Fewer people remembered the details unless they were personally involved or deeply into paranormal investigations. Occasionally, a paranormal show might reference it, calling it a classic example of a child's sensitivity to spirits. But it never blew up. That is how the story stayed, well known enough to be whispered about, studied by a small circle of enthusiasts, but overshadowed by more dramatic hauntings with bigger budgets or best-selling books behind them. Perhaps that quieter, more authentic vibe is what gives it lasting intrigue to those who do look it up. There was no Hollywood script, no massive controversy, just a family caught in a web of unexplained events, struggling to protect their young daughter and maintain a normal life. Even decades later, if you went to Ellerslie and asked some of the older residents about the Wyricks, a few might lower their voices and share that they remember the stories. They might talk about the time Heidi ran to their house, scared, saying she saw a strange figure in her yard. They might remember how Lisa once confided that she felt something watch her in the hallway late at night. Or they might shrug, saying they never saw a thing themselves, but they could not deny hearing the gossip. That is often the nature of small-town secrets. People remember but do not dwell. Life moves on, children grow up, houses change hands, and the world keeps spinning. Yet now and then, someone stumbles upon an old article or an old interview with the Wyricks, and that spark of wonder returns, reminding them that the simplest places can hide profound mysteries. Some of the investigators who had once prowled the Wyrick House with cameras and tape recorders also moved on, turning their attention to newer cases or retiring from the paranormal field. A handful never forgot what they saw or heard, though. They would share their experiences at small ghost hunting conferences, telling of how Heidi so calmly described Mr. Gordy, or how certain times at dusk, the house seemed to sigh with an energy that defied logic. They might show a photograph of Heidi back then, a sweet-faced child with a hint of sadness in her eyes, and talk about how they felt protective of her, wanting to shield her from the unknown. Few things can shake a person's worldview like watching a little girl show no fear of a presence that is invisible to everyone else, while trembling at the approach of another that remains unseen yet feels tangible to her. For many, it was not just about collecting evidence, but about witnessing a family in distress, trying to navigate the impossible. Heidi, when she was older, granted a couple of longer interviews, explaining that while the experiences had been terrifying at times, she never felt alone because Mr. Gordy was truly kind. She believed he acted as a guardian, though why that was, she could not say. Some mediums believed Mr. Gordy might have known or sensed Heidi's sensitivity, choosing to guide her so she would not be completely at the mercy of the darker entity. Others think it was just a coincidence that a benevolent spirit resided nearby. Either way, it made the story unique, as though two conflicting energies inhabited the same space or orbited Heidi's life. Even in the end, no one pinned down the absolute truth. Was the disfigured man an angry spirit, or a lost soul seeking help but too frightening in his appearance to convey it calmly? We are left to wonder. It is that very wonder, that lack of tidy resolution, that keeps the tale alive among those who enjoy walking the blurred lines between reality and the unseen. The Wyrick haunting never had a grand finale, no exorcism that banished the spirits once and for all, no discovery of hidden bones in the walls, no giant confrontation that ended in a swirl of ectoplasm. Instead, it simply faded in and out, shaped the Wyricks' daily life for several tumultuous years, and then lessened as Heidi grew up and found her own footing. In that sense, it feels deeply human, almost relatable. Not every haunting rips through headlines or ends with dramatic closure. Sometimes, it lingers, influences, and ultimately wanes, leaving behind stories that later get passed along in hushed voices. If you look back on that period, you might imagine a little girl playing in her yard in Ellerslie, laughing at times with the wind in her hair, only to pause as if she hears someone calling her name, a voice no one else can detect. You might think of a mother who stands in the kitchen, hands trembling, as she senses a change in the atmosphere, that intangible coldness drifting past her. You might see a father who checks closets at night, determined to keep his family safe even though he does not know what he is dealing with. And you might picture Mr. Gordy, an elderly figure in suspenders, quietly observing them all with a patient gaze, as if ensuring things do not spiral out of control, even though they so often teeter on that edge. That image of dual presences, one friendly, one threatening, became the core of the Wyrick House lore. People who have studied the case sometimes say it shows the complexity of hauntings. Maybe spirits, if they exist, come in all shapes and moods, just as people do, and if a child's eyes are open to them, she can meet both friend and foe in the same realm. Or maybe Heidi was generating it all unconsciously, manifesting her stress in the form of poltergeist activity, giving it shape in her mind as Mr. Gordy and the disfigured man. Yet how, then, did she recognize a real deceased neighbor in a photograph? That puzzle remains unsolved, fueling debate among the curious. Decades later, the Wyrick story still surfaces here and there, occasionally mentioned in compilations of lesser-known hauntings. It never soared to the heights of big-name poltergeist cases, never commanded the front page, never became a blockbuster film. But those who delve into the specifics find it compelling and quietly unsettling. There is a poignancy in knowing this family dealt with the inexplicable not as an extravagant horror spectacle, but as part of their day-to-day reality. Some might even say that is scarier, because it suggests that unusual forces can take root in the most unassuming places, with no dramatic fanfare, simply moving into the life of a child and weaving themselves into her normal routines. Even now, if one drives through Ellerslie, Georgia, they might pass by a house that looks perfectly ordinary, maybe with a fresh coat of paint, a trimmed lawn, and a couple of cars parked out front. They might see kids riding bikes, neighbors chatting, and the sky rolling overhead in gentle blues. There might not be the slightest sign that once upon a time, a little girl named Heidi saw a kindly old man's ghost there, or that another presence loomed in her nightmares. Perhaps the house itself is different now, or perhaps it is the same, quietly holding memories that only manifest on rare occasions. Some haunted locales become tourist attractions, but the Wyrick House never did. It belongs to that category of homes that contain secrets they do not advertise, known only to those who bother to look. You might stand on the sidewalk, pausing to wonder, if you stepped inside at dusk and the house was quiet, would you sense a shift in the air, hear a distant knock, or feel the hair on your arms rise? Would you see the faint shape of someone standing by a window, an elderly man who disappears the moment you blink? Or would you find it utterly normal, the ghosts long gone? That uncertainty is part of what makes ghost stories endure, especially the ones that remain unpolished by sensational media coverage. They retain the mystery that something happened here, something not easily explained, something that left a profound mark on those who lived it, yet the bigger world never fully looked in. If Heidi were to offer advice to anyone going through something similar, she might say not to be afraid to seek help, to talk openly even if others doubt you, because the real harm is in isolation. She might also say that not every spirit is evil, that the ones who mean no harm can provide comfort, though that does not lessen the fear of encountering the darker ones. Her parents might add that perseverance is all you can manage sometimes, that you hold your family close, keep faith or hope alive in your own way, and never let go of the belief that you will come out the other side. The family did, after all, survive it, even if their understanding of the world was forever altered. So that is the story of the Wyrick House, woven from the recollections of the family, neighbors, investigators, and the child at the center of it all. It is a quiet tale of a haunting that never clamored for the spotlight, yet lingered in the background of paranormal lore for those who look beyond the famous names. It involved a sweet old ghost named Mr. Gordy, proven to match a real man who passed away, and a frightening figure who appeared disfigured and brooding, never offering a clear reason for his presence. It involved a young girl named Heidi who grew up under the weight of seeing things most of us cannot see, and a pair of parents who struggled to keep their home loving and safe. It left behind audio recordings of strange knocks, photographs with orbs, eyewitness accounts that could make you shiver, and a memory that still stirs the imagination of anyone who hears about it. Whether or not you believe in ghosts, the story shows how the unknown can reach into the lives of ordinary people in quiet corners of the world, turning simple homes into places of question and wonder. Even today, the lesser-known status of the Wyrick House might be its biggest charm, saving it from the sensational pitfalls that sometimes blur the line between truth and entertainment. This was never about sensational headlines or a quest for fame. It was about a real family in a small town, coping with inexplicable events that tested their courage, shaped their child's experience, and forced them to confront the possibility that our world is bigger and stranger than we assume. The fact that it remained under the radar only adds to its resonance for those who prefer authentic stories over polished tales. It remains a testament to how, in the most unsuspecting places, the line between the seen and unseen can blur, and when that happens, one family's life can become a tapestry woven with both the comforting hand of a spirit who means well and the chilling presence of one who does not. If you are drawn to stories like this, tales that never made headlines but still carried genuine chills, then the Wyrick House stands as a subtle reminder that real experiences do not always come packaged with big drama. Sometimes, they linger in the daily rhythms of a family's life, overshadowing birthdays and quiet dinners, leading a little girl to speak to someone who should not be there, but is, in her eyes, as real as any living person. And if you keep that in mind as you pass through any sleepy town in Georgia or anywhere else, you might realize that hidden behind the friendly waves of neighbors and the neatly mowed lawns, there can be mysteries waiting in the corners,